Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your moderator, Patrick Tucker.
Hello, good morning. Good morning, thank you for being here. I'm Patrick Tucker, I'm Science and Technology Editor at Defense One. This next session on NATO couldn't come at a more important time. And I think that it's also sort of important to point out that we spend a lot of time at this conference focusing on a lot of dire threats. This is a good news story for NATO this year. NATO, a majority of members for the first time, this was announced this year, have reached their 2% defense spending burden. That's great news. Of course, with the addition of 2 new members, it's larger than it has ever been. New strategic plans and concepts to centralize operations and also to reinforce the eastern flank. So there's a lot of exciting things to talk about because, of course, the threat is as real as ever. And so that good news meets some very serious concerns. Please help me welcome our panelists today. Hanno Pevkur, Jonson, Angus Lapsley, Anders Carp, and Phil Breedlove. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So again, Slido, we want to hear from you. We want you to participate. Please take advantage of the app to send us some questions. I think we have someone in the room with a microphone as well. Participation is very important. I was sort of a last-minute addition, so I hope you're going to help me do my homework. And we want to hear from you. It's as simple as that. Let me start with you, Angus, actually. One of the things to come out of the July NATO summit, a new Ukraine NATO command in Germany. Tell us a little bit more about that. What is that going to do, and how do you expect different member states to participate in that?
Thanks, Patrick. So, look, there were 2 big things from the NATO summit in Washington. One, commitment to keep strengthening our own defence and deterrence, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. But the other was that we absolutely have to remain focused on supporting Ukraine. Europe's security rests on what happens in Ukraine. The decision that we took in Washington was to start to bring into the NATO family and structures and organisations more of the coordination of the support and the coordination of training for Ukraine. A lot of that has been led by the US system up until now. They've done a fantastic job. But we, I think, recognise that this is a long-term effort. We're going to have to keep doing this for a while. And therefore, institutionalising it in NATO makes a lot of sense. So there'll be this organisation in Wiesbaden, which will grow out of what the Americans are doing now. All allies will be involved, and it'll be helping to coordinate all of the various bits of national and international activity that's happening.
Okay, so one of the key things that has come out of the discussions of the last couple of days around the EU and the promise there of increased defense spending, particularly as it relates to the Russian threat, is that there is amongst the EU this is something that emerged, a lack of a strategy for victory in Ukraine. Phil and Hanno, is there a lack of a strategy of victory in NATO for Ukraine? I'll start with you.
So first of all, thanks for having me, and it's a great question. I'd like to turn it a little bit at the first and say that while I do believe there are some strategies out there, the biggest challenge right now is not strategy, it's policy. It's policymakers making a decision to take the actions in Ukraine that we need to take. And as I travel and talk to leaders in my country and others, there is not now, I think, a strategy or a policy to win in Ukraine. We do not define our policy about winning in Ukraine in the United States. We leave that open-ended. We'll be there for as long as it takes. We'll give them everything they need, but we don't say to do what. We will be there as long as it takes to win and expel Russia from Ukraine. We'll give them everything they need to win and expel Russia from Ukraine. And so it's that to do what in the policy that we don't see today.
Hanno, do you think so?
Well, I don't want to be a party ruiner, but sorry, Philip, we are not giving them everything they need.
I agree.
This is the reality, and when we come to the strategy, well, there is an understanding what the Ukrainians have to do, and they are capable of doing that. The question is that they don't have everything they need for that. And I've said that once that, the question for us as a policymakers, as a decision makers is very simple, that do we want Ukraine to fight or do we want Ukraine to win? So this is the question that, that when we can decide that on the political level that we want Ukraine to win, not to fight, then we have also the next steps available for us. Because last year in November, Estonian Minister of Defense came out with the victory strategy for Ukraine. We said clearly that, when we want Ukraine to win this war, not to fight, then we need to make a long-term decision in each country, at least 0.25% to Ukraine from the GDP. So that could give us around 120 billion annually. When we add Ukrainian own money to that, then this is enough to win this war. Because Russia is spending at the moment around 10 billions in a month.
Yeah.
So when you take all these numbers, then you understand that Russia is at the moment spending more on this money as we are collectively together with Ukraine, and this is a problem.
Yeah.
So this is why I believe that there is a strategy, there is a policy, there is an understanding on Ukrainian side what has to be done to win this war. The problem is lack of money, and the problem is lack of equipment for the Ukrainian army, and also the limitations. The limitations are stupid. I don't understand them, because you cannot fight one hand behind your back and then go to the boxing ring that you say that, okay, I have two hands, but I will box only with one hand.
Yeah.
So this is not the way. So you cannot go fight with Mike Tyson like that. Or in Russian case, Alexander Karelin. So, but anyway, the point is very simple, that we can do more, and we cannot give so much advantage to Russian army to fight with Ukrainians.
Let's go back real quickly to this idea that Ukraine is fighting with one hand tied behind its back, and part of the reason for that is a certain amount of resistance, particularly in Washington, but certainly some other capitals, to allowing Ukraine to fully use capabilities to their full advantage. First, there was resistance to giving them the capabilities that they've been asking for since the beginning of the war, and then there's some residual resistance to allowing them to use them in a way that is most operationally effective. From your perspective, from your conversation, not just with Washington, but I know Estonia, they're very aggressive and forward in their thinking on this. Are you beginning to see some of that resistance loosen? Are you beginning to see Western capitals begin to understand that some of their inhibitions about allowing Ukraine to fully lead into the use of capabilities is softening?
Well, just take the timeline. 2 years back, we were talking that giving the heavy artillery or tanks is an escalation. Then we made a Tallinn declaration, or the Tallinn commitment to send heavy artillery. We sent all our howitzers to Ukraine. The tanks started to go to Ukraine, many other equipment. So there was no escalation. Then we were talking about that, okay, what about the long-range fires, and then suddenly UK sent Storm Shadows, and we didn't see any escalation. And the fear of escalation is something I really do not understand, because the only one who is escalating is Russia. So Ukraine is not escalating. Ukraine is trying to push Russians back. And this is why, all these discussions about the red lines or fear of escalation, this is something we just put aside and talk about winning the war. And this is why we have general, and people who know how to fight, and let them to decide what they need. And when they say that we need this or this, we have to give it. So we don't have to, put in our heads that we have limitations. No, we don't.
Right. So let me return real quick. Very good. Yes. Enthusiastic support for this idea. Let me go back to my original premise on this kind of duality where Ukraine continues to need a lot of help, need more help than we're providing, but NATO being very strong right now, really at the height of its strength. Let me turn to you, Paul. NATO's newest member, Sweden. What do you anticipate bringing to the alliance? And how is Sweden viewing the question of providing adequate support to Ukraine, both as a country, but also as an alliance member?
Well, let me first say that we very much welcome NATO and NATO taking a larger role in supporting Ukraine, because it's very natural. Ukraine is going to be part of the alliance. Therefore, it's in our incentive to work with interoperability, standardization, and so on. So that's the right thing to go. What we bring into the alliance is an area where we punch above our weight. It's our defense industrial capability. There's no other 10 million country in the world who can produce fighter aircraft, submarines, advanced IFVs, artillery systems. Our industry does integration really well, and what we found that we have a strong ecosystem of producing platforms and where we can collaborate very extensively with the Ukrainians. And that could be, of course, in sending platforms, but it could also be on working with them on innovation. For example, the Swedish procurement agency right now is in charge also of building up the Ukrainian procurement agency, DPA. So we offer a broad ecosystem as a smaller country into the alliance as such. I think with the Swedish territory provide the alliance with operational depth. We, of course, have strong capabilities in the Baltic Sea, since we've been operating there for decades, under the surface, on the surface, and in the air. And we have Arctic capabilities as well, and a quite strong intelligence community also in Russia. So those are some of the things that we've been doing right now. And I think that the Swedish and Finnish NATO membership has really consolidated the northern flank, and there's so many things we can do now among the Nordic Baltics as well, and that's in the interest of the whole alliance.
Yeah, and I think that's such a valuable point about the value of innovation that different companies that are choosing to partner with Ukraine, they are learning more about what great state competition looks like on the battlefield than certainly companies that are choosing to stay home. So this is, go ahead, Phil, yeah.
So may I just also add to that from a purely military perspective. As the SACEUR, I longed for these two countries to join the alliance. It happened years after I left. An important point is we love all of our allies, but our allies come to the alliance with different capabilities. These last two members came to the alliance having had a long history of exercising and coordinating their capabilities so that our tactics, techniques, and procedures are the same, and making sure that our kit is compatible. So these two great nations, when they joined, they were immediately an addition to the military capability of the alliance.
Yes, Angus, you had a thought.
And, well, as we're piling praise on our Scandinavian colleagues, I think the other thing which both Sweden and Finland bring is a really strong historical focus on civilian military integration in territorial defence, which is a really big theme for the alliance as a whole, actually. How do we make sure our civilian authorities and populations and planning are set for collective defence? I'd also point out that if you look at increases in defence spending in Europe at the moment, some of the biggest increases as a proportion of national wealth are coming from countries like Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. And I think that it's indicative of an understanding that the threat scenario in the north is more complex than it's been. But these countries are all countries who are determined to get ready for that.
Yeah, and one, of course, the things that Sweden brings is Saab. So, Anders, let me turn to you, because on this idea of companies choosing to partner with Ukraine, benefiting in terms of understanding the battlefield a little bit better, and understanding a new way to innovate at the edge, a very key theme, I think, for modern defense contractors. Saab is limited in what they can say in terms of how much or what exactly they're doing to help Ukraine, but you are helping Ukraine. Tell us a little bit, if you can, what are some of the lessons that you're extracting from the partnership?
Yep, thank you. And thank you also for having me and Saab here. So I think it goes back to our customers actually donating our equipment to Ukraine. It started actually before the war with the NLAWs going in from the UK. We've had anti-tank weapons, we've had air defense, radars, and open information. We're now in all domains with the latest pledge of Swedish Air Force to provide them with airborne early warning assets. For us, it's been really interesting and satisfying that we've been able indirectly to support Ukraine by actually having systems being designed for one enemy especially, which is the enemy that the Ukrainian heroically fighting. That the design that we actually did years ago actually worked, that it was easy to deploy, easy to use. We have designed most of our systems for conscript army, which we actually see most of in Ukraine as well, and easy to sustain and having maintainability, if that is a word, over long term. That has been really interesting to see that it actually works. Some of the lessons learned, and this is, I think, for both the coalition of willing that supports Ukraine right now to consider in the long term, how are we going to provide spares and repairs? How are we going to provide continuous training? Because many of those brave men and women that came to Sweden, UK, and other countries to learn about the systems, they are actually dead now. So they can't teach the next generation. So this continuous training. And here I feel, or we feel sometimes, that it's easier to talk about more Patriot missiles for billions and billions and billions of dollars than maybe a couple of million for a spares package. And that has to change if we're going to change the outcome on the battlefield.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point. And it brings up the question of interoperability. This is a smidge technical. Let's not get too technical about it, but it is one of the huge challenges for NATO alliance members operating with one another. Where have there been some improvements in creating greater interoperability among the NATO members? What still needs to happen? I'll throw that up. Angus, you might have a thought on it, but also anyone else that wants to speak to it. Then Phil. Yeah, go ahead, Angus.
Well, I think the big thing that's changing in NATO, even since General Breedlove's time as SACA, is because we now have a set of operational plans for collective defence, which basically tell allies, we want your bit of your military doing this in this place, and you'll be alongside that country, and you'll be doing these functions in this bit of geography. That will drive interoperability. It'll also drive capability choices. For example, if you're up in the north, you're going to look at capability that allows you to operate in the geographical climatic conditions of the north. But if you know you are fighting in this corps, in this division, and you'll have these folks alongside you, that is going to drive the decisions that you make. So I think that is the biggest single lever that has changed in NATO in the last couple of years.
Phil.
I was just going to add that we're dealing with some interoperability surprises. We long ago said we were going to build 155 rounds, and everybody could shoot them. And we found out that we build 5 different kinds of 155 rounds, and not everybody can shoot them. Yeah. And so while we are attempting to get better at this, we still have some surprises to deal with.
Well, yeah, but then I guess you had maybe 5 or 6 different companies that were very happy that they were also producing 155 rounds, and then so it worked out well for them. But Hanno, you have a thought on interoperability as well.
Well, of course, we have a lot of challenges, that even when we take the CV90, one of the best, or the best infantry fighting vehicles what you have on the market at the moment. So still, you have different type of ammunition, you have different comms, and the interoperability is difficult among different countries. But this is only CV90, and then when we take M777 or a different type of howitzers, still the 155 is the question. So anyway, we have we have to find a balance between the fair competition, because you have fair competition also in the defense industry, because companies are coming with the new solutions which maybe are cheaper or might be cheaper. Best product, let the best product win. But on the other hand, in the military is always a question that Sweden just launched a new intelligence vessel. It will be in service probably for 30, 40 years. So now is the question that when you buy something, you will buy that for long term. So interoperability, and I would like to see that in Nordic Baltics we have only one infantry fighting vehicles, but then we have in different procurement systems in every country. So I would like to see that we are using the CV90, or as a howitzer we are using the K9, but still different countries have different interests. So this is why one thing is interoperability, also the comms, and also the standards when we talk about the 155, that really 155 can be shot not only or fired from K9 and M777. So this is the point, and this is the key for us, not on the political level, but on the practical level, defense industry level, to find these solutions which make common systems interoperable.
So, and you have an interesting sort of solution also to the interoperability challenge. It's very popular, but also very controversial in certain among people that I talk to, and that is joint acquisition. Joint acquisition
yeah.
across NATO.
Well, we've done that in Baltics, and this is why I'm saying that, that we should, strive for that we will do more, because, even when we have in one region, because also when we take the NATO defense plans, then we have, and then also NATO structure, then we have Norfolk, Brunssum, and Naples. So we have, like, inside of NATO, we have 3 NATO. So, but even in Brunssum, when we take Operation North or Center, then we could have joint acquisitions there. We don't have to buy everything, because when you take the rifle, 556 is still the 556. But at least for the big systems, which will be in service for a long time, which is easier to maintain, and spare parts are easier to get, then I would say that we should consolidate more these acquisitions.
Yes, so I wrote about this when you first proposed it. A lot of people wrote to me afterwards. Very smart people said this is a fantastic idea, it's very long overdue. And some other people wrote to me and they said, oh my gosh, if you think that Turkey, Hungary, France, Germany, and Estonia fight now, wait until you're trying to do joint acquisition through
but we did
NATO.
it. We did it for the air defense with Latvia. We did it for the vehicles with Lithuania, with vessels. So it can be done.
Okay, I want to turn to Paul, but first I want to turn back to Angus and ask you your opinion on this idea of joint acquisition across NATO. How realistic is that? Without formalizing it, what can you actually do? And then to Paul.
No, so we have I don't know exactly how many, but some contracts with NSPA, which are framework contracts for anti-tank weapons, for instance, and some others. Which for us is, of course, really good, because less time is spent on cumbersome negotiations on terms and conditions that actually they are set from the beginning. Similar setups through the FMV in terms of anti-tank, also in the Nordics and Baltics. So and I think the whole industry would like to move to such a setup, especially for these systems that are sort of more generic and less customizable than perhaps a command and control system or similar.
Okay, Angus and then Paul on this.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, the NSPA, so that's the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, I forget the exact figure. I think it's got about $13 billion worth of contracts on the go at the moment. So its role has really expanded, and the war in Ukraine is driving that. And it's a mix of both buying the relatively simple things to buy, like ammunition, doing it in bulk, but also more complex things, like, for example, Patriot missiles, which a group of nations have come to. Now, it's not a panacea. Those nations have still got to know what they want. They've still got to have the money for it. But it's definitely one way of doing things faster and more efficiently.
Okay, Paul.
I think we have a fairly solidified view of what we need to do. We need to work on harmonization of requirement in early phases. We need to work on standardization. I think this is one of the issues that should be elevated to a much higher level within the alliance, because it's really important. It's about joint acquisition and shorten out also the acquisition times, which are way too long, as we're learning so much about the innovation from the battlefield, and technology is moving exponentially as well. And what we have done is drawn quite a lot of lessons from the war in Ukraine. And you were talking about for the CV90s, we have a big user group of the 10 countries right now. It's getting better every day from all the intelligence we're getting from it from the war in Ukraine. We're operating the 40 millimeter. It's fantastic. You can have an IFV taking out the T-72. That's great. But we're the only one operating the 40 millimeter caliber, which meant that I've sent out a lot of letters all over the world saying, begging for 40 millimeter caliber. Okay, it's difficult to get. Okay, it might perform wonderful, but why don't we all do 35 then? So then we're moving to 35 as well. So we compromise in order to aggregate demand, and that's what we need to do. Because the other thing we haven't been talking so much about is what do we do with defense industry and ramping up production. And I think sending out the demand signal, and then when you do joint procurement, you can put bigger tenders to the industry, and then they will know that they can invest into their industrial capability.
And just we can ask from Philip, but General knows that in U.S. Army you have basically M777 and that's it. Yeah. So we have K9 from South Korea. We have Archers from UK and Sweden. We have AS-90 in Britain. We have Bohdana in Ukraine. We have Susanna from Slovakia. So I can continue with this. And European continent and European Union is, the same, more or less, the same size as US, and then army-wise, US Army is bigger. So you can handle one type. We have to handle like 10.
And just sort of pile on that, for a commander, every new or different piece of kit is a supply chain that has to be maintained.
Exactly.
And that can be harder than the tactical part of employing the weapons, keeping it healthy through the supply chain.
Okay, we have a couple more thoughts on this, but then we'll go ahead. Go ahead.
Just a short, so we don't limit ourselves when we talk about standardization and interoperability, because interoperability also means that you could have the ability to actually be diversified. So I agree on the 155 millimeter example, but for instance, with the software-based EW system, electronic warfare system, or having the ability to change frequencies for the drones. That is what we've seen on the Ukrainian market, that they haven't had one drone for everything. They've had a plethora of different kinds, or many different, which means that even if the Russians are able to block or jam certain UAVs or certain frequencies, they will still have the possibility to use other systems.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is a very important point that Anders is making. I think the main problem is not that we have a diversity of platforms. The main problem is that they can't communicate, that they're not interoperability, that we don't have standardization of supply lines. So I want an element of competition, because we're a big consumer as well of these, because if we get one single supplier, it's going to be bad, expensive, and all have to buy from it eventually. Right. So I think that you can have an element of consolidation, but you also want an element of competition as well.
Okay.
But, to sum up with the interoperability, I believe that we can learn from Ukraine again, because the Ukrainians are at the moment the world champions of interoperability. They were sent everything we have in the West. And they are still managing all of them and inventing also the spare parts if necessary. Yeah. And Volkswagen Group oil filter is the same for Skoda and Audi. So we can survive, and we can. It's not so dark.
Yeah, yeah. So joint acquisition is possible as long as your joint acquisition is rapid, keeping pace with information technology. You all have endured so much defense acquisition talk for a Saturday morning. You're all now honorary consultants for Deloitte. Thank you for bearing with us on this. Let's turn now to the question of hybrid warfare. Who here is familiar with the term hybrid warfare? Who knows what that is? A few of you. So hybrid warfare is basically war through non-direct means. It can mean weaponizing migration on the border. It can mean cyber effects, disinformation campaigns, cyber effects both hitting infrastructure, but also to perpetrate hack and leak campaigns to embarrass politicians, disinformation, potentially sabotage of industrial outfits or entities. This is now a real problem within NATO. This is an example of Russian aggression, not just targeting Ukraine, but actually targeting NATO countries. So NATO has a strategy for hybrid warfare, but that's a strategy, and hybrid warfare is here now in Europe. Hanno, do you think that NATO members are adequately prepared in responding to the hybrid war threat? And then I'll go to Phil.
Well, we are learning by doing. So Estonia has faced hybrid attacks, starting from the cyber attacks already since 2007, when we clearly saw that there was a Russian state-orchestrated cyber attack against Estonia in 2007. So we've lived in this environment already 17 years. And now we just see that Russia is going, basically what we see in hybrid warfare, that Russia is testing us, the West, collective West, all the time, that how far they can go before Article 5. Because, at the beginning they had only the cyber attacks. Then we saw that, there are already something where you can see the attack on the Mr. Volkov physical attack. Then you can see some explosions somewhere in the warehouses, you know, and we see already also the attacks or assassination attempts. So, you know, Russia is testing us. And for us, it has to be very clear that we have to go and show that this is state-orchestrated FSB attack, and then to say that, you know, we have to be transparent because we have to know. And then I believe the Germans will also now investigate very thoroughly what happened in Deal Defense warehouse just a couple of days ago, or yesterday, I believe. So, and I would not be very surprised when we hear at the end of the day that this was orchestrated by FSB, because this is exactly what they do. They are targeting our defense industry and to put us to the position that we are dealing with these kind of attacks. So I would not say that we are not ready for the hybrid attacks. We are, but the question is that in what moment we will say that this will go over this threshold to say that now is Article 5.
Yeah, Phil.
So first of all, what you just did, I think, is very important because it's also illustrative of our electorates, our populations. If you ask someone, what do you think about the hybrid war? They have no idea. Some nations use the gray zone war. Some nations use war below the lines. But what Russia is doing in all these spaces is not well understood. I tell people today that there is active warfare in Georgia by Russia. If you listen to the Moldovan Minister of the Interior, she'll tell you there's active hybrid warfare in Moldova right now. And so people don't see that. And then I even point to my electorate in America that our elections have been attacked by the Russians consistently for almost a decade. And they're already in this election.
Yeah.
And so we in the world don't understand that hybrid warfare is way bigger than sometimes described in these manuals and pamphlets that we write in NATO and other things. They're great, but they don't capture the whole thing. And I think the really important piece of hybrid warfare that is not talked about often enough is information warfare, and how several nations out there, clearly Russia, are meddling with our population through all of these new attack vectors like social media. They've been engineering the news for a long time, but so many new attack vectors into our society.
Yeah, I think that it's a really important point, and it brings up one of these themes that's emerged in this conference that keeps going up again and again, and that is this competition of narratives where you have, on the one hand, a very broad thematic push by autocratic states to weaken democracy by basically exploiting divisions that exist in any democracy and turning them into disruptions that just undermine the ability of citizens to participate in democracy, but also, as you point out, cyber attacks against leaders. You were hit by a cyber attack, and so was John McCain, and so was a lot of people that I know from the Russians, and that sort of thing perpetuates, and then it feeds that broader agenda of just alienating democratic civilizations, democratic populi from their government. But Angus, I'll turn to you. Do you think that NATO has an adequate, as an entity, member states are responding on their own, as an entity has an adequate response to hybrid warfare?
So I think, as Minister Jonson said, we're sort of learning as we go, and there is a lot of activity happening on this at the moment. My colleague Marido Besancenot is here today. You know, she's leading a NATO project on disinformation. Last year, we took a number of big initiatives led by MARCOM, our maritime command, on how do we strengthen security of undersea cables, which has become one of these areas. One of the Slido questions talks about space and cyber in NATO, and both areas where we have, you know, we've become explicit that both are areas in which there could be triggers for Article 5 if action is taken against us, but also areas where we now need and have operational plans, and where we're starting also to move into the area of capability planning and saying to allies, these are the kind of things we need you to have. And this is my last point, this is where we're heading on hybrid. So through our resilience programs, you know, we are being more and more explicit with allies about this is the kind of defences against this kind of activity that we expect you to have, because it matters to the coherence of the alliance as a whole.
Yeah, I want to get to Paul, because we bring up undersea cables, and Sweden is very good at undersea things in general. But I want to stick with you for a second, because I want to see if you have a response to what Hanno brought up. As someone that's familiar with how disinformation campaign works and just narrative campaigns work, the thing that you have to do, it's very hard. You actually have to get in front of the lie and tell people that you're a population that they're going to be subject to a disinformation campaign, and to a certain extent that inures them. The US government has a lot of problems with this, but they sort of recognize the importance of it, and that's just one government, pointing out directly when there is a Russian or Chinese or an adversarial attempt to influence the American discussion. Should NATO have this? Should NATO be out front, as Hanno said, pointing to an FSB campaign that's happened here, pointing to a GRU campaign that's happened here? Should they be rapidly responding to these sabotage attempts, assassination attempts, disinformation campaigns as they occur in real life?
Yes, and I would argue that we are increasingly doing exactly that. And the debate on this has changed unimaginably in NATO over the last 5 years. 5 years ago, you still had quite a lot of allies saying, well, we're not really convinced it is the Russians, or if it is it really a sensible thing to call it out? That debate has gone. So I would say where you're suggesting we should go is exactly where we now are.
Okay, let me turn to Paul, because we brought up earlier undersea cables and also hybrid warfare, especially as it affects the Baltic Sea. We have a number of different entities have pointed out that Russian activities out of Kaliningrad and elsewhere are creating GPS disturbances across the Baltic Sea. How do you look at this hybrid warfare threat, especially as it affects open areas and electronic warfare?
That is nothing new. There's been throughout history, asymmetrically, the opponents has always been trying to get your weak points in society. I mean, you could make the cases as old as a Trojan horse. But it has evolved as technology has evolved. It's also the symptom of increased great power competition. So this is, and I think here, of course, the NATO has an important role to play into this, and you're doing good things on MARCOM and undersea cables. EU, actually, in the nexus between internal and external security, has a lot of important tools about this as well. This is about situational awareness in the international institution, but it is a national responsibility. You got to get your own structures into place as well. That's why we in Sweden created a new National Security Council, National Security Advisor. We have a Minister for Hybrid Threats, Resilience and Total Defense and so forth, to make you more resilient against this, because you can't really plan for all the contingencies, so resilience is really the key. Now, when it comes to the underwater domain, in the Baltic Sea, we've been operating there for so many decades, so we like to think that we know the things inside out with all the cables and so forth. With our submarines, we had a steep learning curve, I think both with Nord Stream 1 and 2 and also with the Baltic connector as well. And we learned a lot about strengthening our ability there. When it comes to this kind of spoofing activities, this could be symptoms of exercises, it could be deliberate, or it could be protective measures as well. And they, of course, have an effect when it comes to for civilian air passage and so forth. So it's something we are aware of and we follow very closely as well.
Yeah. I think that's okay. Hanno, yes.
Yeah, very short comment. That one thing we have to understand that Russia doesn't respect the international law. Especially when you talk about maritime law or any other, normally you don't go to the other territory and assassinate someone. So they've done that multiple times. When we take also all the violations of the airspace, or we take the violations of the maritime law, what they have done, so they do not respect, and this is why we have to be, reacting to that with public actions. We have to show that yes, we have to point the finger to them that they were the ones, and because when you spoke about the GPS jamming and the interference, what they are doing, so this is a clear threat already to the civilian travel. So this is a clear threat. So we cannot respect that. But when you go to Russians and say that, hey, you did it, no.
Yes. What, us? What?
It's not us, we don't know. It's maybe from space.
Yeah, right, I know. A guy in his basement, right?
Yeah, but they are not. They do not care about the international law. Is the point?
Right. So like surveillance, intelligence, being there, understanding what you're seeing first, and then communicating it very essential. We have a lot of Slido questions. I'm very excited to get to them, but I have one more kind of difficult one for you all. Because, of course, right now, you could walk away with a picture of NATO. It's very optimistic. We have coordinated plans. We have great vision. We increase spending, vigilant against the threats. This is, however, a question that comes up all the time. After November, the United States, you could have a very different level of participation from the United States in NATO. There's a lot of things that could change very quickly because of the way the election turns out. So a certain US presidential candidate, he need not be named. Don't name him. If you say his name 3 times, he shows up. So, you know. And then he asks for an appearance fee, so just don't do it. But this presidential candidate has said that NATO spending, the requirement, should actually be lifted to 3% of GDP. Angus, very direct question. Can alliance members afford that?
Yes, I think they can, actually. It's well below the average of Western European spending during the Cold War. And I think given the threat scenarios that we face today, for most European allies, spending will have to rise considerably above the 2% floor if they're going to deliver the increases in capability and the better usable, sustainable capability that we're asking them from. Now, in saying that, I'm conscious that these are really difficult political choices, and I'm not a politician. My job is to tell people what they need to do for defence. But you know, we're not asking countries to sort of rip up the basic balance between social spending and economic spending and defence. We're asking them to to make sure that proportionately we are ready to deal with the threats that we now face, because those threats have got worse over the last couple of years, and they're not going to get better in any time soon, I think.
Okay, so yes, they can afford it. Phil, you had a thought.
Well, I wanted to go back to that unnamed individual and just say that I always want to remind that, yes, we have some issues to work through. And yes, sometimes the words and rhetoric are very harsh and they cause friction. But factually, if we look back at the last time that individual was in charge, our presence in Europe grew, our investment in Europe grew, our spending and military capabilities in Europe grew. So I just caution everyone. I'm not making a political pitch here because I don't do that. But I just want to remind everyone that there's a certain momentum about the United States and NATO. And the last time it was not a terribly bad result.
Okay.
Well, no, please. I'll give the time for applause. So. Well, you asked that, can we afford that?
Yeah.
So Estonia is spending at the moment close to 3.3%. We go up to 3.7 in a couple of years. And yes, we can. When you mentioned that, one of the campaigns in US, so yes, we can. But my question is rather different. So my question is, can we afford Putin governing Estonia? So my answer is no.
Yeah.
And when we're thinking that, when you put to scale also in Europe, I said that in the morning when we had one roundtable that, I might be very unpopular, but not maybe in this forum, that when we have on scale, rather to pay more money to people who are growing or keeping the vineyards, or to have the freedom and independence, I will choose independence.
Yeah.
And this is, I know that I'm very unpopular regarding the farmers, and farmers will be in Brussels streets with all the tractors immediately when we talk about, reducing the money from the agriculture, but still, the question remains, when we are not ready to invest more into defense, and I've said that more than 1 year already, that 2% is not enough, it should be 2.5 or 3% even, so it's not only this candidate we don't want to name, it has been also in our agenda already for a long time. Then we have to decide whether we invest more into defense from our own budget, or we reduce on European level some common expenditures. So this will be the debate, and I was very unfortunate to see that during the European Parliament election campaigns, we didn't see that debate. We still saw the debate about the agriculture.
Yeah.
So this is the point, and you cannot put a price tag to the freedom.
Yeah. Freedom is less expensive than the alternative. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, well, is 2% enough? No, it's certainly not for us. So we're at 2.2. We have a trajectory up 2.6% by 2028. And we realize with the new capability targets that's going to be set, we're going to invest for a long time. So much more money is needed. Now, for the more macro question, I think that this European addiction to military presence and power, that's unhealthy for us, and it's unhealthy for the Americans. And I invest into our own capabilities also because we want to strengthen the transatlantic link and be a good partner, because I think we're all unified in this panel that the world is a much better place when the Europeans and North Americans are collaborating, dealing with, could be Russia or China and so forth. And then the question is, how is that going to be done? Is that going to be done within the EU or within the European pillar of NATO? I would say European pillar of NATO because of all the work that's being done now. Because I think one of the interesting things with the capability targets is that we are getting a much better understanding clearly of what each nation need to do when it comes to enablement and executability of plans. There's no higher priority than if we want to deter and defend Russia, that we make sure that the plans are executable. That is the top priority. Yeah. And that, I think, is becoming much more illuminated now with the new defense plan and the capability targets.
Yes. So let's go to, real quick, some Slido questions. The first one, should NATO introduce finance ministers' meetings to coordinate their total defense expenditures? Because the one thing that NATO lacks is enough meetings, I think. So Angus, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've been trying to think how to answer this one. I mean, I'm not sure finance ministers would thank us enormously if we suggested it. Although, interestingly, I have started to get calls from finance ministers wanting to understand, what their defence colleagues are on about and where's it coming from. But generally, what we're seeing is, as you move back to collective defence, a wider range of government needs to be involved in how you prepare. So we have had meetings recently in Brussels of health ministers, for example, looking at how you would provide large-scale healthcare in an administration. Interior ministries as well, etc. Yeah. So there is a broadening happening. But yeah, I suspect finance ministers would look slightly askance.
And it will not help. So, during the war, of course, every minister is a defense minister. But, at the end of the day, we, with Paul, we have to go to the government and explain also to the Minister of Finance that, we really need more. Mm-hmm. And this is the common values we are defending.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a very good one. Sort of links to that hybrid warfare question. How do you see NATO's role in deterring Russia today, specifically in the information space and in the cyber and space domain? So Article 5 is deterring a land invasion of Europe, hopefully, but we're not really deterring Russia in the information space. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this discussion about hybrid warfare, or are we? So Phil has a comment on this, and then Hanno. And we've got like 6 minutes left, so let's condense our answers a bit.
In 20 seconds, I would also want to have us think about the answer to the following question. Mm-hmm. We seem to, in today's world, have convinced Russia that we're going to defend every inch of NATO. Mm-hmm. We're going to defend every inch of NATO. I think that what Mr. Putin hears is everybody else is fair game. Mm. And I think that's a deterrence I think we need to be talking about.
I think that's a good point.
Regarding the cyber, there is a very simple answer that, you cannot only defend, you have to also have offensive capabilities. But this is something we don't speak about.
Yeah.
But Russia knows that we have offensive capabilities.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question because how do you deter Russia in something that it's already very practiced at and using to great effect? But at the same time, we haven't seen the full force of their cyber effects because, as you point out, we have tailored access operations and they're quite impressive. And I'm not allowed to talk about even a little bit that I know, and I shouldn't know it. So the multi-domain war is not only fought on the battlefield. How does your country synchronize its actions in other instruments of power internationally?
In any way, or in all the ways we can. So it's, I believe that all of us have the same.
No, but I mean, this is a whole government endeavor, and of course we have a national security strategy, and you want to make it a whole society when you do it. I think we learned some things also in regard to our support for Ukraine, of providing both military, economic, and political assistance as well. So, I mean, there's much to do. The same thing on the innovation side. The time when we worked with military innovation in stovepipe, with civilian innovation, that doesn't work, since the technological development on the civilian side is much quicker, for example.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's great. So here's one, bring in Anders a little bit. How do you see the role of global industry vital for interoperability, cybersecurity, AI, like Microsoft, SpaceX, NVIDIA in defense? I think this gets to that larger question of like, how do you create interoperability? Is it through a new company that's very good at data fusing, for example, and merging software together? But Anders, your thoughts on this? How do you bring in the role of global industry?
And I had like 15 minutes.
In the hallway.
But this, start in the Ukraine. You can look at clips on X or Twitter and see that those two systems, they shouldn't be able to talk to each other. But the Ukrainians have figured out how to connect certain systems through their own C2. There we can learn a lot, but there will be consequences, because Ukraine is in war, so they don't really care about certain things that we do in a normal peacetime, but also what is allowed to do in terms of, for instance, using cloud technologies. Going forward, or taking us as an example, we have invested in different companies. One being present here, Helsing, which is a young AI, German or now European AI company, for us to use the best of the new together with sort of the old defense industry with defense standards. It's a fantastic learning experience for us.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really awesome. Here's a great question. I'm certainly very curious about. I know that Phil talks about this often. I know that you are right there, and so you have, of course, tremendous insight into this. What happens to Belarus if Ukraine prevails over Russia? If Lukashenko falls with Putin, could it join NATO alongside Ukraine? What is an after scenario for Belarus, and how fragile is Lukashenko right now, given the partnership with Putin and also given pressure from within his own population? So you have, and then Hanno.
I'll just be very short, because I have talked about this.
Yeah.
I see Belarus as an opportunity. I know that there will be many in this audience that will disagree, but I think Belarus has tried to stay on the fence rather than to fall on either side specifically. And I think Belarus is an opportunity once Russia is defeated.
Well, I believe that, Belarus has to be seen, as long as Lukashenko is there, as a part of Russia. What happens after that, there is only, a way for the better future. This is why at the moment I don't see any difference between Belarus and Russia. But we all know that there are democratic forces in Belarus who would like to see Belarus as a member of European Union, as a member of Europe, as a member of Western civilization.
There's a lot of concern right now because, of course, you're seeing some pooling, some cementing of Belarusian forces on the border, and there's some concern that they might involve themselves more actively right now in the Ukraine war. Is that something Estonian intelligence has an opinion on?
Well, let's see how it evolves. Of course, we are gathering this information, and collectively we are looking very carefully what they are doing there. But at the moment, I don't see that in the nearest future there will be something happening.
Okay, we have time for just like one or two more. Is there anyone in the room that has a question? We can send a microphone out to you. It's hard to see y'all, but we do right here. This lady, third row. Please stand and introduce yourself. Thank you. Yep.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Olga Vasilevska-Smagluka, I'm a Ukrainian parliament member, and my question comes from the beginning of your incredible conversation. Do you want Ukraine to win, or do you want Ukraine to fight? It's more than 10 years of war in Ukraine, and most of bravest and motivated soldiers are already died. And we have, as you know, a lack of money in the budget, lack of ammunition, lack of arms, and so on, lack of people.
Yes.
So while you, not you personally, but NATO countries think what you want Ukraine to do, to win or to fight, we just pay our lives. So how to break this circle of violence? And when you, NATO countries, not you personally, when you define what you want Ukraine to do. Thank you.
Yes, how do you define what you want Ukraine to do? That sort of speaks to the strategy question.
In Estonia, at least, we defined that already, 10 years ago, in 2014, that we have no doubts about that. So, and this is exactly, we just need to continue. And unfortunately, yes, we see also some members of the European Union who are not in favor of Ukrainian winning. So this is why, I believe that this is the sad part of democracy, that we have to find a consensus, and sometimes it takes too much time.
Paul, you've got the closing thought on it.
Yeah, well, I think we have to understand what the stakes are for you, for Ukraine, but also for ourselves. Supporting Ukraine is also about investing into our own security. If Russia would prevail, we would have disastrous consequences for Ukraine, but also for us. And that's why we have to continue doing it in the long run. And that's why I want to see long-term economic and political and military equipment to Ukraine, so you can have a long-term steady partners as well. And then we come into the nuts and bolts about that, about ramping up production. But we have all the economic clout that we need in order to provide you with the goods for you to win, and we're very grateful for everything you've been doing for Ukraine, but also for the rest of us in Europe.
Okay, so thank you. I think that's a great note. The next session on the Western Balkans will start very shortly. The moderator is Maria Taddeo. Right now, please join me in thanking our panel for this excellent discussion.